Welcome to Empowered Living. I'm Ann Sheu. On this podcast, innovative leaders and visionary experts share insights and practical tools for work, family, and marriage. Each episode, we'll explore how to elevate your life while staying grounded in what truly matters to you. You're working hard to navigate relationships, build a thriving family, and create a legacy of purpose. We're here to help you do that with confidence and intentionality. So if you're ready to live a life by design, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Empowered Living. I'm your host, Ann Sheu, and today's guest is Paulo Sibaja, entrepreneur, speaker, world traveler, and someone who shows up fully in the arena. Paulo leads with purpose, discipline, and heart, and he brings all of that into this conversation. We get into the real secret behind every healthy relationship, and it's probably not what you think. We also talk about how to navigate the hard moments in life and how those moments can become turning points if you let them. And then Paulo breaks down his 4-3-2-1 lead formula, a simple rhythm that can help you show up as a steadier, more intentional leader in every part of your life. This conversation is real, it's practical, and it shows what becomes possible when you choose to lead yourself first. Let's dive in. Paulo, it is so great to welcome you to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ann. I know we've been long awaiting this moment, and I'm so grateful that it's finally here.
I'm excited for our conversation today. Okay, so I want to dive right in. I know that you've got two quotes that you have really built your life around. So can you just share what those two quotes are, the one from Einstein and the one from Roosevelt?
I'm going to start with Albert Einstein's quote. This kind of became, I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of a life quote. I don't know if it's quite popular or not, but I certainly adopted it. And it's essentially taking something that resonated with you and carrying it with you for the rest of your life. It's not just to draw inspiration, but it's to basically embody whatever this particular quote says. And the first one is by Albert Einstein. I have a dear friend of mine who calls me his Albert Einstein. So it's kind of funny. I guess I must somehow embody this man. It's essentially try not to be a man of success, but rather a man of value. And I remember when I first read that in high school, I believe I was a sophomore, maybe a junior in high school, it kind of really hit a nerve, and the good kind of nerve. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a man of value, right? Rather than being a man of success. Well, as I've grown a little bit wiser and a few gray hairs here and there, I've come to the realization that success actually follows when one becomes a person of value. If one pursues success on its own, it's going to come and go. Your worth is going to be up and your worth is going to be down based on that particular success, whether it's in business, whether it's in relationships, you name it, right? But if you and your listeners or anyone ends up embodying what it means to be a valuable human being, right? Then it truly transforms one's mindset, because one's value, one's worth isn't tied to the success of a business, isn't tied to the success or failure of a relationship, quite frankly, if you look at it from the opposite end. And embodying that for me was so transformative, because it truly helped me realize that the value that I have isn't tied to any one particular material thing, as the world defines in materialism, right? And I'm thankful for the little nugget of gold that Albert Einstein left us. The second quote is a little bit longer by my favorite American president, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, he was giving a speech at a university in the United Kingdom, and in it, he basically talked about the man in the arena. I'm sure some of your listeners have heard this particular quote. It's a long one, so I'm not going to say it all, but essentially, Teddy Roosevelt says, "It is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or how the doer of deeds could have done them better." He essentially says that the credit belongs to the person who's got the bloodied eye, who's got the sweat dripping down their brow. Essentially, the credit belongs to the person who's willing to go the lengths to devote himself or herself to a worthy cause. And essentially, he summarizes it by saying, because in the end, right, whether one succeeds or whether one fails, it is better to have tried and failed than to have a place in history as the timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And that particular quote became a life quote. I have 4 of them, I know. But I love wisdom, and I believe wisdom comes from all corners of the earth. And that particular quote became a life quote when I was running for public office. One of my big supporters sent me a private message, and he said, Paulo, you are the embodiment of Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. And it gave me so much strength at a time where the campaign was just not going my way. And it made me realize, wow, yeah, it is a neat thing to think my place will not be with the cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And I think each and every one of us have that within us, the ability to ignite that fire and actually try to dare greatly. I think Mel Robbins talks about this in one of her books. Excuse me, Brene Brown talks about this in one of her books, right? Daring greatly. What does it mean to dare greatly? Well, if you dare greatly, there is the possibility of failure. But to quote Albert Einstein again, right? Failure is simply stepping stones along the road to success. And one can be successful if one realizes the value that one has.
Thank you for sharing both of those. I also have the Teddy Roosevelt quote framed in our office.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, love that quote. So tell me, were you born this wise, or did something happen in your life that spurred you on to this path of really living a life of high impact, chasing after what you believe is the right thing to do, the impactful thing to do?
We have this debate, nature versus nurture, right? And I think, first of all, I'm one who believes credit must be given where credit is due. And I have incredible grandparents and incredible parents to thank for. My grandfather, particularly on my mother's side, instilled in me this desire to do monumental things. I remember as a little boy, the things that he would say to me. And you mentioned values and what those values are. I have three primary values that I tend to gravitate towards: wisdom being number one, justice being number two, and courage being number three. Right? Wisdom without the application of justice and without the courage to act upon it is essentially just having beautiful, lofty thoughts and ideas and recognizing patterns, right, within the universe. And so when I had these individuals that I looked up to, my grandfather, my mother, my father, my grandparents, uncles, aunts, really, quite frankly, people who were willing to do great things and just kind of push the envelope. So I gotta say, it's probably a combination of two. I want to share a personal story. When I was in high school, so I was born in Costa Rica. I was a little boy. My parents moved to the United States. We immigrated to the United States. And as I was learning American history and learning English, I came across, obviously, the American Civil War. And I remember reading accounts, and not just the American Civil War, but the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s as well as the 1860s. I remember thinking to myself, wow, why weren't more people doing and saying more? Right? Why weren't people standing up? Why this is a fellow human being, not property. And perhaps it was that little seed my grandfather planted back in Costa Rica that really kind of ignited that quest for justice and that search for wisdom. And then through life, I got to tell you, Anne, through life, the courage to do something and at a minimum say something about what's happening. And I would definitely credit it to that. It's a combination of the way that I was raised. It's a combination of who I feel I've always been. And that could just simply be a result of the words spoken into my life by the people I hold dearest.
Beautiful. So when you talk about living a life of value, right? Adding value into this world, what does that look like for you? And how has this definition of adding value changed throughout your life?
Let me tell you, it's been a journey. I would have to say for me specifically, I love the podcast. It's called Empowered Living. I think one of the greatest untapped values that many of us, in fact, let me propose the following. I believe humanity, for the existence, at least when we look at recorded human history and what we know, right? On paper or tablets or whatever. We don't have the full picture. A lot of it is theorized, right? We come from this, we come from that. But when you look at recorded human history and our understanding, including today's understanding of the word power and its meaning, its source, what is power, right? We get into these philosophical questions. Most of the power today, and if you ask anyone in the room, I do this in one of my keynotes, I ask people, what is power? And at the essence of people's answers is essentially saying power is someone exerting something over someone else, right? It's someone exerting something over someone else. You Google what is power and you will find 8, 9, 10 different kinds of power: charismatic power, this kind of power, oppressive power, you name it. But I believe humanity today hasn't actually analyzed the true meaning of power. And so in one of these one of these episodes of life where I was just really, really, really down, where I just was a little bit lost myself, trying to find, back to those values, back to that purpose, I began to ask that question: what is power? Just to briefly kind of give a little window into what happened, I'd gone through a very difficult relationship. The breakup of the relationship destroyed any kind of confidence I had as a result. It didn't pan out as I expected it to. And perhaps my mistake was giving expectations to something that was developing so beautifully. But I remember reaching out to friends and asking them for help, and no one could. My friends would be, and they weren't doing it to be harmful, but they would say things like, forget that person, Paulo. They didn't deserve you. And I remember thinking, I don't like that. I don't like that kind of mentality, or I don't want someone to speak that into my life. And so I got on the call. It was a pretty dark period in my life. I got on a call with another friend, and I remember telling him, I remember sharing with him, I want a Paulo in my life. I want a Paulo in my life. And he goes, what do you mean by that? I want someone who's gonna listen to me the way I listen to my friends. I want someone to feed me healthy doses of words and thoughts, not poison, and certainly not poison towards the other person whom I still loved at the time. And we hang up. This particular friend wasn't able to provide me what I was looking for. And we hang up, and I'm sitting there on my couch in Miami Beach, and I say to myself, I want a Paulo in my life. I am Paulo. I can be logical. I can ask myself the difficult questions, and I can answer them too, honestly. And so I did. I started asking myself, and that's when I realized that power, the world's definition of power today, is upside down. Because at its core, and I want you, Anne, for example, and your listeners to think about this, a moment where they were truly, truly down in the dumps, in dark place, right? Someone might have come along, or more importantly, one realized that power, that empowerment actually comes from within. And that realization that I was Paulo, that I didn't need anyone else to give me worth, to give me value, right? I started saying to myself, all right, I get it. I understand. I understand that true power isn't what one does to control or what one has over another. True power is actually endless source of energy. And it comes from within, because true power at the end of the day doesn't take. True power empowers. True power doesn't take. True power empowers. And that to me was such a huge revelation. And that led to the development of the 4-3-2-1 lead formula, which was groundbreaking for me particularly, and it led to wanting to share it with the world. All right, guys, all right, gals, we've had it wrong all along. Let's redefine power. Let's redefine what it means so that the world realizes we don't need someone else to give it to us. We don't need someone else to take it from us, because people can only take our power if we're willing to let them take it from us, because power innately comes from within. And that was sometimes in our darkest moments is when we have the clearest vision of what it is, that the answer that we're looking for.
Can you tell us more about the 4-3-2-1 lead?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I gotta tell you, Anne, this was not just a dark period in terms of my personal relationships, but it was a dark period financially. Our family was struggling. I was struggling. We were all struggling. And I remember thinking to myself, all right, Paulo, you got something to share with the world. It's helped you. You've helped yourself. You've literally pulled up yourself from the bootstraps, even when you didn't want to or didn't feel like it. Write it down, figure it out. And I started working on this and months, and I would change it. And I'm like, all right, what is it that is inside of this brain? What is it that is inside, recorded in this body of mine, that I can share with the world, right? And it started simply with all these things that I had repeated to myself over the course of my life. So the 4-3-2-1 lead formula essentially is the 4 laws of a conflict leader, right? What is the mindset that a conflict leader adopts to deal with that? There's 3 kinds of conflict: inner conflict. And that's the conflict that one could have with, say, with yourself. It could be an addiction, for example. The second is outer conflict. That's the conflict that you may have with something, let's say, like a bird. I had a friend, for example, who was terrified of chickens. And when we got to the root of it is he had been attacked by a chicken when he was a little boy. And so he would always say, birds come after me, right? And it's because he'd never let go of that particular trauma from his childhood and the attack from the bird. And then the third conflict is inter conflict. And that's the conflict that we have with one another, humans have with one another. And when we understand those three types of conflict, and then we adopt the 4 laws of the 4-3-2-1 lead formula, the mindset of a conflict leader, right? Then what we're doing is we're essentially liberating ourselves from the things that continuously hold us down. That's the 4L. E represents the edges of the triangle. And the triangle is essentially the currency, right? One side, one edge of the triangle, one at the other edge of the triangle, and then the base of the triangle. No side is greater than the other. No side is more important than the other. They're equal in value. And essentially that's the currency that we trade in. What does that mean? That's the kind of actions, right? The laws are mindset. The 3 edges of the currency triangle, it's the actions that we take to resolve conflict. Then there's the 2 attributes. That's the A of LEAD, lead formula. The 2 attributes, these are things, the character that we develop to be good conflict leaders. And then lastly, the 1D, LED, is the one duty of a conflict leader. And I'd actually like to share with your audience what the first law is, because oftentimes we don't realize that how much power that particular law carries. And it's very simple. And I encourage all of your listeners, if they're dealing with problems internally, if they're dealing with conflict with someone else that they love, or with conflict with anything that surrounds them, just remember the first law of the 4-3-2-1 lead formula. And that is this: it only takes one. That's it. It only takes one to break the cycle of conflict. And that power, that choice is always ours.
Where does somebody start applying that though?
In everything, I'll give you a perfect example. This may sound silly, right? I used to despise packing and unpacking. And Anne, I'm telling you, it was a problem. And this problem became crystal clear. I was leaving my apartment, Miami Beach, to head to MIA, Miami International Airport. I was headed for a business trip. I hadn't packed, and I had to call the Uber in 45 minutes. Literally started throwing everything into the luggage. I mean, my clothes weren't folded, were flying everywhere. When I got to the destination, of course, I realized 30% of the things I needed were left behind. I mean, no sort of planning. And more than anything, it just created this anxiety within me, right? This type of conflict is that outer conflict that I'm referring to. And I remember I'm literally out of breath. The Uber is here. My God, I have to shove this suitcase down, make it fit, make whatever, whatever I was throwing in there fit. I finally shut it. I get there. I'm out of breath from how I was exerting myself and adding all of this pressure. And I'm sitting there on the Uber ride to Miami International Airport. And I ask myself, Paulo, what the heck is wrong with you? What the heck is wrong with you? I'd never asked myself that, right? And the cool thing is this actually came after, after that conversation that I mentioned about sitting on the couch. I asked myself, what is wrong with you? And I said, but Paulo, before you pass judgment of yourself, ask yourself a very critical question and answer it honestly if you're able to. What is the first memory you have of packing, of luggage? And the first memory I had was when I was an 8-year-old boy about to turn 9. And we were packing all of our clothes, actually not really all of our clothes, a very limited amount of our clothes, whatever toy we had. I think I was only able to bring along one toy with me to the US. And it wasn't just the act of packing luggage. It was the fact that I was uprooted, right? My parents didn't do it to cause harm, but that entire process of packing up our lives, putting it into the suitcase, saying goodbye to my grandmother and my grandmothers and my grandfathers, my cousins and my aunts, the incredible amount of pain that I felt at that moment was associated with packing and unpacking. I mean, and when I tell you it was a problem, I would come home from a work trip 2.5, 3 hours, 3 weeks later, and that luggage was still unpacked. I mean, it was bad. And then I asked myself, wow, okay, what is the second memory that you have? And the second memory that came back, and I ended up realizing the second memory was actually the first memory. So my dad left Costa Rica before he brought my brother and my siblings, my mom and I. So it was my dad actually packing, and he did that so he could secure a job in the States, so he could have at least an apartment for us to come home to, right? To come home to when we moved to the States. So I realized that the first memory I had was not the one I thought it was. It was actually my father packing and my father leaving. Not because he didn't love us or he didn't care for us, because he was hoping instead to build a better life for us. But as a little boy, I didn't quite understand that. So there was a lot of sadness also in my first memory. And then I realized that the second one was when we were packing as a family to say, and we were saying goodbye to everyone else. So the conflict formula, that first law, that particular mindset, right? It only takes one to break the cycle. And that choice is always ours. We must be willing to ask ourselves the critical questions and, more importantly, be willing to answer them honestly. And in that car ride, and something really cool happened. I said to myself, hey, Paulo, you're no longer 8. You're no longer 9. Look around you. It's okay. It's okay. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And I did. And that triggered such a realization, because that gave me actually that particular moment in that Uber ride on my way to Miami International Airport was when I got the revelation of the first law, the choice to break that cycle as something as silly, manifesting as silly as packing and unpacking, unearthed a far deeper memory connected to very sad moments in my childhood. And I wrote it down. It only takes one to break the cycle. And without knowing that that would become the first law of the 4-3-2-1 lead formula, it eventually did.
If someone's listening and they are a parent, what's your advice on how to apply this question? How can it only takes one to break the cycle, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you apply that into your parenting practice?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you two tidbits of information. Adults often carry trauma from their childhood, right? Our body is such a phenomenal thing. Our body is literally a history book of what's happened to us. And it's important that we go back and read it, because adults often carry that trauma and pass it on to their children without even realizing, right? So there's two particular ways that I would recommend a parent apply this first law of it only takes one to break the cycle. If you didn't like the way your parents parented you in a particular case, that right there is a huge warning to yourself to raise awareness. I don't have to do it the way my mom and dad did it, right? So whether it was mom saying something like "fake it till you make it," I was talking to someone about this, and she told me, I hate it when my mom would say "fake it till you make it" because it felt so fake. And she said that she was, without realizing it, living out that. She was faking it until she made it, and she felt that all of her life she was faking it. And I said, you don't have to follow what your mom said. You can choose a different path. So that's one way, right? It's parents looking inwardly and saying, all right, how am I contributing to the growth of my child? And one way to do that is by asking or sharing with yourself, I didn't like the way my father did this. I didn't like the way my mother did this. Give it a little bit of time and energy. How could I do it better? What kind of, in this instance, how would I have wanted my father to have behaved? How would I have wanted my mother to have behaved? That's one. And then number two, when it comes to children, I'm going to share a story with my puppy. And puppies are a blank slate, as are children. Babies are blank slate. And my puppy was such a rambunctious little puppy, but he was adorable. He was cute. I mean, everyone on the street had to stop him. And I remember taking him to a party, and I was doing so well in kind of instructing him, right? He needed to behave. You know, dogs oftentimes when when they see, they just kind of go towards the food and they just start eating, and you haven't even finished pouring the food into the bowl, and you're like, hey, buddy, relax. You know, you're gonna get your food, but you have to wait. Actually, that reminds me, I ended up leaving him with a friend of mine. Little side note here. And he said, Paulo, I don't think Ollie has been eating. And I go, why? What do you mean? He just sits there and looks at the food. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I've trained him to wait until I give him permission to eat. So he's not give him permission to eat. The poor dog is over there waiting for you to do it. So Ollie, he eventually gave Ollie permission and he ate. But back to the story. So I take Ollie to this party. And one of the things that what I wanted to do in instructing him was not to bite. not to bite at people, right? Well, a friend of mine was so excited to play with Ollie that she encouraged that behavior. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it became a habit. Ollie started biting everything. And I'm like, how do I undo this habit? And so this is the second tip I would give parents. Unlike a dog, right, which could be trained in the choices that the dog can make based on how you feed them or give them praise, right? So in Ollie's case, whenever he would bite, I would stop playing with him. So he knew he wasn't doing right. Whenever he wouldn't bite, I would praise him and give him a little snack, right? So how do we take that principle? Again, not comparing children to animals whatsoever. But so how do we take that principle with a parent and a child? When you've noticed that your child is now developing this habit of, you name it. I mean, children bite. They bite. I remember when my niece would come home from preschool, so and so had bitten her, and like, okay, so it doesn't bite. So it's presenting a choice, giving the child, right, a choice that's going to steer them in the direction and in the healthier behavior that they ought to be modeling, right? No, we don't bite another human being. That's just not cool. We don't want that to be the case. So present them with a better option. And I would actually even recommend first, let's say biting is the issue with a child. Not only do you explain the principle that biting isn't polite, but you say, if what you're trying to do is play with a friend, why don't you grab a toy and offer that instead, right? Listen to what your child is trying to do or trying to say, and then come up with that other option and encourage that, verbally encourage that, physically encourage that, and watch how children want to please mom and want to please dad. I mean, we can pretty much say that, and that can be borderline unhealthy. But when you're raising a child, it's important to understand that tool of a child wanting to please mom and dad, and actually harnessing that in an effective and constructive way, so that your child stops biting stops biting their friend at preschool.
What about in your marriage, like, or in your most important relationships? How do you apply this first law?
Yeah, I'm not married yet. I'm not married yet, but I will actually say you mentioned the most important relationship. I believe the most important relationship that each and every one of us has is the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's critical, because if we're not talking to ourselves positively, if we're not thinking about ourselves positively, if we're not encouraging ourselves when no one else is encouraging us, we're going to depend on other people to determine what our worth is. Kind of going back to the same point in the conversation we were having earlier, right? We're going to then say our value comes from our business success. Our value comes from the affirmations we get from our partner. So I would say the most important relationship, twofold here, answer to your question, the most important relationship is the relationship we have with ourselves. And then secondly, how do we apply it with ourselves? I'm going to tell you, Anne, I'm sure your listeners can probably relate to this. We all have this issue of negative self talk. Oh man, I didn't do it right. Or, oh man, that's not what I meant to do. Or, you're so stupid. I can't believe you did that, right? Or, can't believe you stop yourself right in the tracks. Stop yourself right in the tracks and say, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. I'm not dumb. It may have not been the best choice, but how could I have done it better? I'll give you an example of this. This was in my apartment in Miami Beach a while back. I was doing a favor for my landlord, and I had to go to the post office. Get to the post office, there's a big line. He lived in a different country, or lives in a different country. This is when I lived at that place. He lives in a different country. And so I would collect his mail for him, and I would bundle it up and then mail it to him. So I get to the post office. I mean, you can imagine it was a hot, muggy Miami Beach day. I get to the post office. I'm already sweating because I biked over there. Boy, I mean, talk about hot and muggy. So I'm get there. I'm a little irate. I hadn't eaten. I needed to put this to the post office. I told them I would get it done, and I wanted to fulfill my word. So I get there. Oh gosh, it's a line. So I go up to the front and I said, "Hey, I need to ship this overseas. What do I need?" And so the post office attendant says, "You need this document, et cetera, et cetera." So I go grab the document. I'm filling it out. As the line is moving along, I get to the front, and here I am turning everything in. And the post office attendant says to me, "Oh, you're missing this form."
Mm.
Yes. I did not behave. My higher self did not show up in that particular moment. I was just irate. What? Why didn't you tell me this? I asked, and well, I'm not moving. I'm staying here. Give me the form so I can fill it out. And literally, there's a line behind me. There's people behind me watching and observing me make a fool out of myself, right? And I'm ashamed to share this, but I forgave myself. I forgave myself. I said, "Wow, Paulo, really? This is how you're behaving? Like this is just not acceptable, man. This is not acceptable. You gotta do something about that." So and this became crystal clear after the post office attendant had called up the next person in line, and I'm over here literally standing right next to the person that the post office attendant, shoulder to shoulder, and I'm refusing to move, Anne. I'm refusing to move, and the woman who's there at the post office to send her package is taking out her credit card, and the credit card machine is right next to me, between her and between me, and I'm like, oh my god, this is embarrassing. Can I be any more, any more of a jerk? So I step away. I go all the way to the back of the line. I fill out the form. I let everyone go, and I said to myself, okay, you have a do-over, Paulo.
Mm,
You didn't do that right. How would you have handled it differently? Literally, how would you have handled that situation differently? And I said, okay, I would have gone up there, and the post office attendant would have said I didn't have the right form, or didn't fill out the additional form that needed to be filled out. Pardon that confusion there. Okay, I would have just said thank you very much. I should have grabbed the form, filled it out. Perhaps politely asked, is it okay if I just stay here to the side and fill it out? And when you're done with the next attendant, you can attend me. You can help me. If I was in a, if my issue was I wanted service now, right? That could have been an option. The other option could have been just going all the way back to the end of the line, fill it out until I was done, right? There were several different ways that I could have handled it that was far better. Well, I get to the front of the line again. This is now reality, which way I could have, how I could have handled it better. I get to the front of the line, and another post office attendant helps me, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. It is not the person I was to put it bluntly, an a-hole to. It's the other person. So, but of course they witnessed my poor behavior. So I'm super nice. I just hand over what I need to. Is this correct? Is this proper? And there is this little voice inside of me convicting me. And I recognize that voice. It's my own voice and saying, Paulo, you have to make this right. You have to make this right. Go apologize. Go apologize. And I was resisting, and I didn't want to because pride got in the way, right? Pride was getting in the way. I didn't want to. And I said, no, no one who witnessed you lose it is going to witness you apologize, but you're not apologizing because you're trying to save face with everyone else. You're apologizing because you did wrong. You didn't behave well. You treated another human being poorly. So I finish my transaction. I walk over to her and I say, hey, my sincerest apology. I shouldn't have treated you the way I treated you. And you know what? As I'm sharing this story with you, someone else deserved an apology. So if she's listening to your show and she remembers this incident, it was the lady who came up after me. I'm certain I made her feel terrible and awkward. So my apologies to her as well. Let's right those wrongs, and your show, Empowered Living, is the way to do it, the place to do it. So my apology to her. So that's how we can apply to ourselves, right? That important relationship that we have with ourselves. I couldn't live with myself having walked out of that post office knowing that I treated another human being that way, and I had to make it right.
What do you tell the listener that's listening and they are thinking of their own moment where they made a mistake
Mhm.
and now it feels like the moment has passed? Maybe
Mhm.
they've left the situation and they don't have the opportunity to go back to apologize to somebody. How do you suggest that somebody moves through that regret or shame so that they can forgive themselves for the mistakes that they've made?
Yeah. Wow, powerful question. Powerful question. Number one, if that person is still alive, reach out and apologize. It will go a long way. If that person isn't, forgive yourself. Just say, you know what? I didn't behave well in this situation, and I apologize to myself for having done that. Show yourself grace. Let go of that shame, let go of that guilt. Shame and guilt do no one any good. So just say to yourself, all right, I let go. I recognize I did wrong. I recognize I didn't behave as I should have or wanted to behave. So I'm forgiving myself and I'm moving on. And then thirdly, if kind of flip the script there, if it was done to you, right? Forgive, even if forgiveness was never requested. I used to work for a public relations firm way back in the day, previous life. And my goodness, I had a boss that was terrible. And I'll leave it at that. But this particular boss hammered it down so much that I essentially had forgotten my own voice and my own voice, literally. From my former boss's perspective, I was a terrible writer. I was just you name it. And I remember one day thinking to myself, oh, it's been 5 years that this happened, and I can tell that I still speak with highly charged emotion about this particular boss. I got to let that go because it is only harming me. So I literally went up to my room. I had these mirrors. I looked myself in the mirror and I said, Paulo, let it go. And I mentioned the person's name and I said, I forgive you. You may never ask me for forgiveness, and that's okay, but I forgive you. I'm going to break this cycle that is self-induced cycle, and I'm going to forgive this person, and learned from what this individual taught me. One thing that this individual taught me was that, Paulo, when you write, if it confuses the writer, when you speak, if it confuses the audience, it means you haven't written well, and it means you haven't spoken well. So that was my key takeaway from that specific instance and that specific boss. It was just not the best, to put it lightly. But I just let go. I forgave and I let go. So I would say that to your audience members. Number one, try to search for the person and apologize to them. If you're not able to, you can still apologize to them. They'll listen. And third, if it was done to you, forgive and let go.
How does somebody start this path of forgiveness, right? Like if there's somebody out there that I am holding on to some anger, some resentment, some frustration, and I know I need to forgive them, where do I start? What does the beginning of that journey look like?
Yeah. Write it out. Grab a pen and paper. Talk it out. Stand in front of a mirror, right? In the case that I just mentioned with that former boss, I literally stood in the mirror and I said, you did this, you said this, you made me feel this way, you did that. And seeing my own face, right, as I'm saying this, made me realize, oh, shoot, I had given this individual so much power, including and up to 5 years later, when they were no longer in my life. And ask yourself, I want your listeners who want to embark upon this journey, right? Ask yourselves one critical question, and I'll give you a perfect crystal clear example of this, of how we can hold on to it and how it can be detrimental to us. Do I want it to continue to be an anchor in my life, holding me down, preventing me from rising to what I could be and my greatest potential? I had a friend of mine, we were talking about this, and he had, I'm not kidding, it had been, I think, was it 8, 9 years since he'd worked with an individual. He'd just gotten a job offer at a company, and he found out that this individual was also working at this company, different department. He wouldn't be reporting to this individual, but the pay and the job title was a significant increase from where he was. But he turned it down just because 9 years later, 8, 9 years later, this person was still living rent free in his mind. And I remember thinking to myself, how could you give up such an incredible opportunity? I mean, I know that they wronged you, but it is literally holding you back. It is holding you down. And he eventually realized that. Not in the moment. He ended up turning the job offer down. He didn't get that. He didn't get that pay raise. He didn't get that bump in title. But I think at the end of the day, and based on the conversations that we had, he realized, oh, wow, yeah, this person wronged me so much. But the thing about forgiveness, Anne, is that it isn't so much for the other person as it is for the person forgiving. Because when we forgive, it is a way to break the energetic bond and connection that we have affixed to that particular memory, that particular instance, that particular episode. Just like I forgave myself on that Uber ride in the way to Miami International Airport. It's okay, Paulo. You're no longer 9, you're no longer 8, you're no longer 9. That's part of history. That's your history. And the choice now is, how are you going to become a better person, right? Same thing with my friend, the instance that I just explained. How are you going to take the lessons that you learned to be a better version of yourself? How are you going to improve the relationship that you have with yourself? Forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about yourself. Because when we let go, when we forgive, we are literally unshackling ourselves from everything that keeps us from being successful, from everything that keeps us from truly embodying these values that we hold dear, because they're roadblocks. These instances, these trauma moments, as some psychologists might call it, right? These trauma moments are roadblocks that are preventing us from fully achieving what it is that our heart truly desires.
It's the easiest way for someone to identify their roadblock.
Ask questions. Ask yourself questions. Whenever you're in a situation that you don't feel comfortable, why don't I feel comfortable? Why do I behave like this? Why do I think like this? Why do I say this, right? I think if you break the human into three components, we do three things. We do, we speak, and we think. I would actually add a fourth, and we believe, right? We do. Actually, no, really, there's more. We do, we feel, we act, we love, we speak, we think, and we believe, right? So that's how we end up expressing our inner self outwardly to the world by the way that we feel, the actions that we take, the things that we do, right? The words that we say, the thoughts that we think. So ask yourself those questions. Why do I think this? Why do I believe this? Do I have to continue believing this? Is it going to edify me? Or is it going to tear me down? And so it's basically improving that relationship with yourself. No one knows you better than you know yourself. No one. Why? Because you have lived with yourself all of your life. You have been with you in silence. You have been with you in loudness. You have been with you in joy. You have been with you in sadness. You have been with you when no one else was with you. You have been with you when everyone else was with you. You know yourself better. And we can begin to ask ourselves those critical questions. I always say this: the most important question I have ever answered is why. Why do I think like this? Why do I do this? Why do I say this? Right? And when you ask that when you answer that critical question, why, the rest is gonna come easy, because then the why is going to reveal the what and then the how. The cool thing about the human body, the human mind, the human brain is that everything that is done can be undone. Everything that is done can be undone. An old habit, an old bad habit can be broken. A new, better habit can be forged. And that, I mean, science tells us that clearly, right? Our neural pathways in our brain, gray matter, and what they call neuroplasticity, it's proven. This is fact. All habits, you can kill all habits. You just have to decide that you want to, right? You want to end that cycle. You can create new habits. And how do you create new habits? By doing them over and over again, by feeding them, by giving them the energy they need to survive. And conversely, get rid of a bad habit by not feeding it the energy to keep it alive.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Plus, what's next for you? What are you most excited about in your next?
Yeah. There's so much happening in my life at the moment, and that quite frankly, I'm thrilled and excited for it all. I've got a few business ventures. I call myself a purpose-driven serial entrepreneur.
I love it.
I've just never been one to say, you know what? I want us to, there's specialists or generalists in the business world. People talk about specialists and generalists. There's an incredible gentleman whose business career I followed. He's a billionaire, and he has businesses all over the world in the US, and he's got a stake in restaurants, and he's got a stake in construction, and he's got a stake in landscaping, you name it, right? I am basically modeling my life after him because I am fascinated by everything and anything under the sun and under the moon. But what I'm truly most excited about outside of these business ventures that are growing and show a lot of promise and a lot of future, and in fact, dreams becoming reality. What I'm actually most excited about is a letter that I wrote. I think you and I can agree that the world is going through that we're at a crossroads, right? The world is going through some major conflict, and I've been blessed to have been born in the richest of all coasts, heaven on earth, Costa Rica, and this beautiful little country, small relative to the rest of the world, nestled there in Central America between North and South America, abolished its military over 75 years ago. It was the first nation ever to have abolished its military. We're coming up on the 75th anniversary of Costa Rica abolishing its military on December 1st. And I wrote a letter actually inspired by someone you and I mutually know, Ronnie. He and I were having a conversation over text, and that triggered in me a desire to write a letter as if I were the country of Costa Rica. We're torn with war, conflict between families, conflict between nations, conflict between neighbors. And there's this little engine that could in Central America that taught the world that peace is not a fantasy, that peace is a choice. So I wrote this letter. I'm translating, getting it translated, currently working with someone who's translating it into Arabic. I'm translating it into the 5 most spoken languages. Obviously, it's written in English. Spanish is one of the other 5 languages. I've translated it into Spanish. Thankfully, I remember it and can do it. And the other 2 are Hindi, Mandarin, and then Arabic. I'm currently working somewhat with someone translating it to Arabic. And to get it published in major newspapers across the world as a chain of the country, the nation of Costa Rica, sharing with the world that this utopia, right, that we dream of, that this world of peace that we dream of is not a fantasy but a reality. And how do I know it's a reality? Because 35 years ago, our neighbor to the south, Panama, followed suit. They abolished their military and they formally declared peace, just as we did 75 years ago. The Costa Rican Panamanian border is the only border in the world today that is shared by 2 nations that have formally declared peace. Costa Rica recognized that security isn't found in weapons. Security is actually found in the well-being of the people who call her home. I recognize that too. Panama's security is not based on the weapon. It's based on the well-being of the people who call her home. And the cool thing about Panama and Costa Rica sharing this one and only border in the world that has formally declared peace is that between our 2 countries is a major national biological reserve called El Parque de la Amistad, the National Park of Friendship. And it's shared by Panama and shared by Costa Rica and administered by both, a national park, more like an international park, right? So I'm excited to get this letter published. And you know what I said to myself? If it doesn't get published by a major Arab newspaper, if it doesn't get published by a major Mandarin newspaper or Hindu newspaper or English newspaper or Spanish newspaper, I'll release it to the social media world and let the algorithms do its thing. Because, Anne, I believe in our lifetime that there will come a time where the conflicts of the past, the division of the present will no longer be the case. And I'm privileged and honored to give voice to that future and writing this letter on behalf of the country I call home, the richest of all coasts.
Can't wait to read.
Thank you. Thank you.
If listeners are curious, they want to learn more about you and your work, what's the easiest, best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I would say check out social media, particularly LinkedIn. I'm pretty good at responding through LinkedIn. My name, I'm sure it's going to be on your description. Just literally Google. There are not a lot of Paulo Sibajas. In fact, I've Googled myself and I believe there's only 2 of us. Actually, no, there's only one of them because the other one is spelled with a B instead of a U. Mine is
Oh.
Paul with an O at the end, Paulo, Sibaja, and the other one is Pablo with a B. So that I'm aware of, there is only one Paulo Sibaja, and you'll be able to find me pretty easily.
That sounds great. And we'll also include links in the show notes. Well, thank you
Wonderful.
so much for this conversation. It's been incredible. So enjoyed chatting with you, and
Same.
thank you for the work, the important work that you are doing.
Thank you so much, Han, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to Empowered Living. I hope today's conversation sparked some inspiration and gave you tools to live more intentionally in your family, work, and life. If you enjoyed our episode today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story or actionable takeaway. And if you know someone who would love this episode, share it with them, because living an intentional life is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, the life you want doesn't happen by chance, it happens by choice. Let's keep creating it one step at a time.